Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lancat Live Home Games edition number 300 and oh, God knows how many. Listen, I'm laughing because if regular viewers of Home Games know that I've not had the smoothest technological journey on Home Games, and it was all working absolutely fine. Today until Ollie had to go and touch something with about 30 seconds to go and broke his microphone. And then we had a moment where it was like H from Steps in the reunion tour. His headset stopped working and we had a little flap. But we're here. We're here and we're live, and there's lots of people on the live chat. There's tons of you in today, giving up some of your time to join us, which is absolutely super. Listen, we are here. Yeah, cool frog, Ollie. Yeah, very nice.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, I will blame Ollie, Mike, because it was very much his fault, and I deal in fact as Insight Director of the Lancat. As you know, listen, as some of you have already worked out, I am joined today with a very, very special guest. He is a multiple award-winning journalist, having recently won, what was it, Outstanding Achievement Award at Headline Money just a month or so ago. He is part man, 23.8% moustache. Now, of course, he is Darren, I'm worried how Steve knows so much about the Step Reunion Tour. Yeah, very good. He is the owner of the second best Kermit the Frog impression within financial services, and he is the magazine editor at New Model Advisor. Hello, Ollie.
Hi, how are you doing?
Say something funny.
Sorry for the last minute nightmarish panic about audio visuals. I do regret that. I shouldn't have fiddled with it. Yeah, it was too good to be true.
It's all right. We're live now. It's absolutely fine. Listen, thanks for joining us, Ollie. How's life going? How's lockdown been for you?
Yeah, well, it's somewhat slightly hotter than I think Paulson described in his top class Wednesday update in terms of comparing the temperature here to Scotland. But yeah, it's going okay. Anime is currently in a summer break, so I'm not currently editing a magazine on a week-by-week basis. But what I am doing is getting a lot of stuff together for when we return in September. So it's been nice to put some ideas on the table, and in particular to see designs and the creative side coming out. So it's something I'm working on today.
Nice one. Listen, before we get on to the, there's lots of moustache comments making their way on the live chat. Did you have a facial hair fight off today? No, we didn't, Anne, but thanks for the comment. Ollie is in fact growing a moustache, and I am just lazy and Scottish and haven't shaved in a week or so. Why bother? Listen, we've got one or two bits of admin before we kick off. You will have noticed, like, you're all very, very clever and insightful people. I am not Mark Poulsen. Mark is on his Home Games sabbatical for the past few weeks. However, if you are feeling a rather tangible Mark Poulsen-sized gap within your heart, then if you are all good and eat your vegetables, then you might well be seeing him in the next few weeks. So fingers crossed for that. We'll do a little bit of audio-visual stuff. If I click this and then copy this and then come back out of this, which is proper professionalism here. You don't get this on Graham Norton, do you? And copy that. See, I am on the live chat as well. If some people occasionally have buffering issues, which is one of the top 5 worst issues to have under lockdown. If you click that link, if you are having those issues, then it does something smart. I think it delays the feed and brings the audio and the video a little bit closer together. But we're not having any comments on the sidebar today, so I think we're coming in loud and clear, which is good. On the sound front, my neighbours decided to knock their conservatory down and build a new one. Free from the normal social convention of letting us know via text, even a wee text, we're getting a new conservatory, lol. That would have been fine, but that's happening now. So occasionally there's some quite excruciating drilling happens, but I think the workies are on their lunch hour just now, which is a blessing. So apologies if you get a bit of interference coming through. Remember, we have a YouTube channel because it is the future and all that. And what do YouTubers say? You go on and you like and subscribe, and then you get notifications and all that. So you might well be watching us on replay, where all of our previous home games and some other stuff can be found on YouTube too. There's been quite a few new subscribers and new viewers joining us today. So if this is your first week, then hello. Thanks very much for joining us. Big hello to Catherine Knowles, who on Twitter yesterday said that she was giving up one of her first child-free days in a number of weeks because kids are off to summer camp, and she's spending that time tuning into us. Catherine, if you are there, I think you should go in the garden and have a gin instead, frankly, but there we go. Last thing to say, t-shirt of the week. It is double t-shirt action of the week. I am Mark normally has like a heavy metal effort, which I don't have any, and all my band t-shirts are in the loft, and I can't be bothered going into the loft, to be honest, to get t-shirts down. So I have it's too many steps, and it's too hot. Ollie, you're right. I have my 1986 replica Argentina top, which was in the cupboard, which football fans will know that was the year that Diego Maradona soared like a gazelle and headed the ball past Peter Shilton. And also, in the year that Scotland very nearly won the World Cup, had Uruguay not kicked us off the park in the last group stage game. That was a very unconventional alternate reality I've just painted there. Ollie, I know, says Landcat Mike. That's a fair comment. Ollie, you have a t-shirt of the week for us as well. What is it you're wearing?
So I thought it would only be appropriate to wear the Samaritan shirts that we were handed for our long walk last year. I actually, incidentally, wearing the shirt is such a complete pleasure. It's probably one of my favourite shirts. This is incidentally how sad I am that I do rate the quality of my t-shirts. And having just moved house, having had a clear out, this was definitely one of the ones that survived the move. So yeah, I love it. It's a great t-shirt, and it's a great cause to rep on your wonderful Home Games webinar.
Thanks very much, Ollie. Last time I did Home Games, I wore the Samaritans t-shirt, and I'm regretting. Hi, Catherine. I'm regretting not wearing it now because it's a lot lighter than this. I don't know how many of you are familiar with classic football tops of the mid '80s, but it's a bit thicker than your average t-shirt, and I have the windows closed for the aforementioned sound issues, and I am roasting. As a Scotsman often does in even moderate weather. So we'll see how the next 40 minutes or so pans out. So that's all our admin done with. The last thing to say is, if you're on the sidebar on the live chat, we want as many questions as possible coming through for Ollie. We are talking about the role of journalism today within the financial services sector, which we all know and love. But before we get on to that, Ollie, I was on your podcast a wee while ago, as some people might know, and regular listeners to your podcast will know that you like to break the ice with a little bit of a quiz to kick things off, to put people at ease. So I've got a very quick quiz for you as a little bit of revenge. It's nice and easy, and maybe you can play along on the sidebar to see what score you get. So this is going to be marked out of 6. And this is a quiz on famous moustaches in tribute to the rather wonderful effort that you're making this summer. So question number 1, nice and easy. Who is Homer Simpson's neighbour?
Ned Flanders.
Correct. Question number 2, Freddie Mercury, another famous moustache. Can you name any of the 6 songs that Queen played at Live Aid?
Radio Gaga.
Correct.
I try and do it in order, actually. Bohemian Rhapsody.
I don't know the order, but that's correct, yeah.
And there's oh God. I watched the film very recently, and it is a really stunning set because they only had 20 minutes, and the set was like the stage was being switched around. I don't think I can name any more than that, but they definitely played Radio Gaga, and they definitely played.
Catherine's playing along. We Are the Champions. That's right. They played Bohemian Rhapsody, We Are the Champions, Crazy Little Thing Called Love, Hammer to Fall, Radio Gaga, and We Will Rock You. Question number 3. Ron Burgundy is the lead character in which series of films?
Anchorman.
Anchorman, correct. A couple of people on the live chat have mentioned Tom Selleck, which is the next subject of the next question. So Tom Selleck played Richard in Friends. Which one of the friends did he go out with? Was it Monica, Rachel, or Phoebe?
I honestly don't know the answer to this, but I'm going to guess that it was Monica because she
was Monica. It was Monica. We are 4 for 4 so far. Catherine's playing like a champ. She's correct with Monica as well. Question number 5. Hulk Hogan, one of the most famous handlebar moustaches in the world. Can you name anyone that he has fought at WrestleMania?
I presume he fought Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson at some point.
He did fight Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. That's an incredible answer. That's 1 of 12. I would also have accepted Macho Man Randy Savage. And question number 6, your lookalike, Walter White, famous protagonist in Breaking Bad.
Yeah.
What is the name of the actor who played Walter White?
Bryan Cranston.
Correct. Here we go. 6 out of 6, which is a Lancat home games record.
I was nervous about that, Steve, because I've made some people very nervous in our studio by asking them about very niche things that they didn't have a single chance of getting. So you've been kind to me. I appreciate that.
We are nothing if not kind at the Lancat. That is literally one of our 5 aims.
Thanks very much. That's
anyway,
very kind.
Listen, right, that was all very fun. But on to serious business. We're here today to talk about the role of journalism in financial services in these strange and difficult times and all that stuff. But we're not limiting it to what's been going on under lockdown. We're talking about the wider, bigger picture stuff. Thought might kick off with hearing a little bit about you, your journey into being magazine editor at New Model Advisor. How did you get into the sector? What made you want to do this? Tell us about you, Ollie.
Well, we talk to financial planners a lot, as I'm sure you'll be aware, and they often tell us that they fell into financial planning and the financial services by accident, and I really relate to that because that definitely happened to me in journalism. I was very much treated as the village idiot at university, and I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do with my life. And I moved home to try and think about that, and it was the worst decision I've ever made. And so it quickly became apparent that I just needed to be near my friends in London. And I thought, well, I'm spent 3 years writing, handing in 3 essays every 2 weeks. So I need to write and hopefully do something useful. So I basically fired off 1 million job applications for everything from journalism, grad schemes, PR. I had a very disastrous job interview for a PR role at an education lobbying company. And it was Citywire that kind of came back and said, well, we are interested in you. Would you like to come in for an interview? I suppose the rest is history, but the second interview there was very, very scary. And that was when I first met with my first editor, Alex Steger, who sort of taught me the tricks of the trade and molded me into a reporter. But at that point, I had no idea really what I was doing. I was very, very, very much a rookie kind of upstart reporter with no idea. So it happened by accident, basically. But I'd like to think I've made a decent job of at least some of it.
Well, those awards don't win themselves, do they?
Indeed, they don't, Steve. In fact, I don't have any shells on which to put them behind, so you'll have to put up with Kermit the Frog and my 1984 Fender Stratocaster. There it is.
So tell me about your day job then. What does a magazine editor get up to on a day? What does the 9 to 5 look like for you?
The 9 to 5 consists of a heady mix of logistics, sheep herding, creative decisions aplenty, and occasionally sort of getting involved in really exciting news stories, breaking news stories. So it'll be different at every publication, but because New Model Advisor is quite top heavy on editors, Will's in charge of the team as an editor and manages me, Jack, and Charles in our respective roles. We have a lot of input and we share basically the load of working out our editorial strategy. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of back and forth between the four of us about what we do next, where we go, and what we write about. And I think that's a really strong part of our team. And it's without being too sycophantic, I have to say, in lockdown specifically, Will's done an absolutely fantastic job of doing that. It's very, very hard to manage a team in lockdowns. I'm sure a lot of you will appreciate that he's done a really, really good job at that, and he's allowed me to kind of continue with some semblance of normality, and that means being on the phone to people, interviewing people, basically doing a lot of forward planning and strategizing, and then watching it all fall apart as the news cycle changes, and then rebuilding it again. I would say that's that's a fairly good summary of kind of what it's like to be a magazine editor. But there are some real pleasures to the job, and one of the best things this year has just really been seeing our reporters thrive. James and Laura on our team, they have delivered exclusive after exclusive after exclusive, with some great help and insight from people in the industry. And I couldn't be prouder of them as people, actually, because they haven't had the sort of typical first year that a journalist might do on our team, and they haven't had the opportunity to go out and meet people face to face as much, or go to those events, or even attend headline money. So you're right, Tom McPhail, I should just say. Will does spend a lot of time riding his bicycle. I suspect that may be what he's doing now.
Do you mean he's not watching?
Well, actually, incidentally, NMA is meeting for the first time today in Battersea Park after 5 months being apart on a socially distanced lunch. So I imagine they're on their way now, because we're basically meeting just after 1. So I'll go along a bit later. But I would imagine that bicycles will be involved. They may well be watching. So hi guys, please keep me in employment.
So you mentioned about still being able to deliver exclusives and news stories under lockdown. So I've got 6 things I want to, so the conversation will go wherever it goes, and people will chip in on the live chat. But I've got 6 things I wanted to touch on at some point today. And that first one is like the notion of lockdown and still delivering the news under lockdown. Because as someone who's largely ignorant of the journalistic process, never worked in journalism or really been close to people who have, I would imagine that the process of being out and networking and meeting people and going to events and pub chat and what have you, that gossip and news and stuff just falls out of that, naturally or semi-naturally or whatever. How has having to sit in your bedroom on Zoom 24/7, do you get a sense of how that's impacted the ability to deliver news? Has it just changed it?
This is a very interesting question, because I was thinking about this, and I think there's been a huge push and a huge pull in return. So the push factor, I think, that's slowed things down is obviously the immense pressure that people were under at the start to look after the kids, quite rightly, and try and carry on with their own lives. And understandably, that perhaps meant at times that talking to journalists was not top of their agenda, and that was immediately obvious and as I say, completely understandable. I think so that's a sort of push factor. The pull factor working in our favor, I think, actually was this general phenomenon around coronavirus and the way that it's changed how people think. And I think coronavirus has challenged a lot of our assumptions about what we think we can do with our lives on a day-to-day basis and where we might want to live. And I think it's called into question a lot of stuff that perhaps we've taken for granted. But in other ways, it's also taken the gloves off and to completely mix metaphors. It's ensured that everything's to play for. And I think in that quite occasionally febrile atmosphere where there's a lot of stuff happening at once, and people started to see the relative importance of different things compared to this sort of dramatic pandemic and the sort of ensuing healthcare crisis, that really puts some stuff in perspective for people. And I actually think, on balance, subtly enough, it makes people more willing to talk to us, because they think, well, it's all to play for here. I might as well have a conversation about this. There's lots to write about, obviously, because the way that companies have reacted to this is going to be different at whatever level or sector you look at it. But in terms of the human impact on the people actually, on the ground, because companies are nothing more than collections of people. Same with government, same with departments. Nothing more than a group of people. It's been very interesting to see people continuing to open up to us, continuing to want to discuss stuff. So I think having initially been a bit skeptical and having initially thought, this is going to be hard. And granted, there was a bit of a slowing of getting stuff done, and it has been a bit slower, but it's not changed people's attitudes to transparency and people's desire, I think, perhaps on those bigger stories to sort of fight for a little bit of justice, perhaps, particularly where your life companies and your call centers are concerned. But perhaps we can discuss that later.
Well, maybe. See, one thing we've noticed in so we collect ratings, platform ratings every quarter or so. And one thing we were pleasantly surprised with last quarter, towards maybe the start of lockdown, was that sentiment or satisfaction, or however you want to badge it up, was largely pretty good towards platforms.
Yeah.
And we think that was reflective of a generally pretty good job that providers had done in the early stages of lockdown, but also maybe the hypothesis anyway is that maybe people are a little or were a little bit more tolerant of maybe things being a little bit slower as we start to work our way through the new dynamic of working from home. We've started to see the scoring ease off a little bit in terms of the response as we amazingly are another full quarter on and still broadly working under the same conditions. Do you get a sense of that at all at NMA? If you get a sense that satisfaction is maybe dipping, or
that's a really interesting one. I mean, I think one thing I would say about the platform space is that a lot of those businesses are founded on really good relationships, and without being too sort of sycophantic towards a lot of the platform bosses, they're good people. They're really good people. People like Dave Ferguson, the Transact team, Ian Taylor, they're good people doing a good job. And I think when big companies have that and do that, it shows. And I think there's the capacity to store up a lot of goodwill there. And I think relative to some of the sort of perhaps bigger financial services peers, platforms have got that to a degree in abundance. It's never, it's always important never to be complacent about that. One thing I would contrast that with is the issue of networks, because platforms are just part of this sort of broader piece about the different companies, the intermediated companies that advisors deal with. And when I did an entirely unscientific sort of dip of the toe in the proverbial water to look at NMA readers' attitudes to platforms, but also other companies that were serving them, I was, not surprised at all to see the platforms doing pretty well and scoring pretty high. And I think you're right for the reasons that you outlined. I was more surprised to see, perhaps naively, the networks sort of struggle. I mean, there were a couple of people that gave their networks 2s out of 10. And that was interesting to me. It wasn't the whole piece, but it caught my attention. And I think you're going to see in the next sort of 12 months a lot of people start to take another look at their business model, take another look at who they deal with, particularly from a cost perspective in terms of the benefits they get from different propositions. And maybe you'll see some subtle changes start to feed through, in 12 to 24 months' time in the FCA data. So we'll have to see, but it doesn't surprise me that the platforms have handled it pretty well. They're reasonably forward-thinking people at the top, and we've got good relationships, I would say, with the bosses, and they're nice people. So
yeah. So this leads on to something that's been on my mind. So just on that note, actually, so we do our big annual advisor sentiment omnibus research. And back at the turn of the year there, one of the questions we asked was, so your range of technology componentry, so your back office, your platform, risk profiler, cash flow, all those various bits and bobs, if we were to offer you like a consequence-free choice to change any of those. So free from cost, administration, compliance, justification, all of the things that act as barriers to just change a bit of software overnight, or a partner. Would you still choose the same? And actually, something like 70% of people would still choose the same platform. And I think there's an important point there, in that I remember doing a presentation earlier in the year and getting into a bit of bother for the way that I phrased it, but it's difficult not to be distracted by the noisy few, whether that's on social media, whether that's below the line comments, which are maybe more negative than the wider sentiment in the sector. So yeah, I do agree. It will be interesting to see 1 year on post lockdown whether people are going to then revisit some of those business models, and maybe with a little bit more of a time to consider, or a time to look at their processes and their business models, whether that drives any real change. Anyway, that was a seamless link into my next question to you, Ollie. Was on below the line comments, and the subject of anonymity and negativity in the trade press. Now, this is particularly pertinent just now for you guys at Citywire and New Model Advisor, because it's something that's been on Will's agenda recently. Could you tell us a little bit about what's been going on and some of the kind of motivating factors behind the discussions that you've been having?
Yeah, of course. So what I'll do is, part one of the answer, I'll give you sort of what Will did, which I fundamentally support, but then I'll go into the separated opinion, which is not Will's, not necessarily Will's opinion or Citywire's view. It's just my view. So first of all, what Will did was, I think Will recognised that we have a problem with commenters, and we know that from our readers, that sometimes they feel put off or disparaged by people writing particularly unconstructive, or at the worst end of things, sexist, for example, comments on stories that we put on the site. And could have done this quicker, I suppose. Absolutely willing to take that accusation on the chin, but we wanted to approach this thoughtfully and not sort of react to it in a knee-jerk way. But what Will did was basically to say, well, we'll continue to accept people who want to comment on the site using a pseudonym, who have been sort of part of that sort of online community, I suppose, for some time. But if people want to come on as new users of the site and use pseudonyms, which we were detecting was a kind of an opportunity for new commenters to sort of shout their mouths off, we're going to shut that down. So that was the decision that he made. So in practice, what does it mean? It means you can still comment with a pseudonym if you've always had one and you've been a long-standing user of the site. But if you want to join that online community and you just want to sit there being a rabble rouser behind a name like Funds Fanatic or something like that, in a bid to be a bit of a troll, then we're going to stop that. I think moving on to the sort of my opinion about this. I mean, I think I do believe firmly that so much of what you don't see on the site is an important part of this, and we've always been very, very tentative. We've always been very, very tentative about shutting down what some people might argue and what we felt was sort of freedom of speech and people's ability to air their own thoughts. It's not lost on us that advisors are often left the big company providers or the big companies they work for to go it solo, and that there's perhaps a sense of entitlement there, that running their own business, taking the risk, entitles them to have an opinion about the way that things are done within the profession. But equally, I think the number of occasions that I've heard where, and this particularly affects women, and that's one of the things that I'm very mindful of as a magazine editor, posting stories online from the magazine, is the number of women that it puts off, because women see that and they just think this is just a bunch of blokes. And that's not ultimately editorially the position that NMA wants to be in. NMA wants to be a publication that, obviously promotes constructive discussion, but also promotes diversity of thought, diversity of contribution. And I don't think we were getting that. And I still think, there's still some stuff that we can do perhaps, but it was important to take that first step. I should add, it's still a live issue. Still having conversations with the team. You know, a lot. I think we've become a little bit more. We've sort of taken some defensive. We've been on defensive moves, shall we say, particularly where we've spotted articles that we think that could be contentious. That that could really set off some. Some pretty nasty threads, and we've, I think, taken the decision rightly not to let people comment on some of those things in a bid to just keep the playing field level and to avoid the faff that it causes for people when they make a point in a comment that they think is perfectly reasonable, and I'm sure it is, and then they find they're basically being bullied for it. And we don't want that. So you'll probably be hearing more from us on this in future, I would say. But yeah, it's definitely a live issue, definitely informing some of my thoughts about content in the magazine and what matters to the profession. And the conversations I've had in the last month to 2 months are anything to go by. It's been a positive change, actually.
Yeah, and Andy, hi Andy. Andy makes a good point there. So he signed up a few years ago as a pseudonym, as he worked for a provider. I think because I'm thinking about this from different angles. I think back in my life company days, where I was one of a number of thousand individuals working for an organisation, I probably wouldn't have felt comfortable to put my name against a particular opinion or particular issue in case it went against the house view. And I mean, that's another dynamic to take into consideration, is that how do you ensure and promote free speech whilst...
That's a very interesting point, because I think, and this sort of moves us onto the sort of the role of the press here, which is that, for me, it's fundamentally important that the people that get in touch with us to talk to us about things can trust the journalists that they speak to, not to reveal who they are. If they're a whistleblower saying, no, this is going on at this platform company, or this is going on at this advice firm, we want to be able to say to them in good faith, we're not going to reveal who you are. I think I obviously totally understand that, particularly for people in the sort of more institutionalized side, who they want to contribute but they don't want to necessarily put their head above the parapet. That's a very justifiable feeling to have, and we totally understand that. But I think if we could just come on to the the feed, there is another side to this, which as Darcy says, it is a choice. You don't have to comment, and I would add to that, always think twice before you comment. I've definitely gotten that wrong before, but it's a good rule of thumb. But there are other ways that you can get in touch with us too. There are plenty of other ways, and if you're willing to trust us and to put your trust in us, you can get in touch. And my hope and in good faith is that our journalists will handle that with integrity. Just as as Fiona says, she identifies WASPy as a subject. If I could just touch on that, that's a very interesting topic for me. I wrote an article about WASPy 5 years ago, and it got published just before I ended up in hospital. Actually, that was the night that I was out with Tom McPhail and Locke and Paulson in a pub in Islington, and ended up in a loo throwing my guts up and like incredibly ill. I since learned in retrospect that I was on the verge of death, which is my favourite ever Lancaster story. But the article got posted around that time, and I was in hospital, lying in a hospital bed, and there was these threads kicking off from WASPy supporters, and they were attacking me. And granted, I think it was a very good article, to be honest. And not your fault, Tom. Totally understand that.
Paulson's fault.
It was my fault. It was totally my fault. But yeah, the WASPy supporters totally went in for me in a way that I understand now. They had gone in for Ross Altman and some of the other people who were in pretty complex situations with regards to the WASPy politics. But that was the first experience that I had as a young-ish journalist of something really quite nasty. And it was hard. It was really, really hard. And it took me to actually turn my phone off in hospital and say, to ditch whatever I was watching on Netflix and just say, I can't deal with this anymore. But that was the first case study I could probably think of. And it
Yeah.
wasn't nice, it was bullying and harassment of a kind. I don't think it was the worst thing. I don't think it was the worst example of it where I was concerned, but there definitely was. But that was the first time I kind of experienced that. Yeah.
Let's move on to one of my big questions, Ollie. Because before the session, as I would normally do, I'd ask around to see what people would like me to ask you. And the number one thing, both Lancats, but one or two other people as well, is the role of positive news as well as negative news.
Yeah.
As you know, we're not going to win any awards for insight by saying that among a certain proportion of the population, financial services doesn't have the best reputation. No. For whatever reason. And I know you're working in the trade press as opposed to the mainstream media, but to what extent do you think the press has a responsibility to report on the good as well as the bad? Or is bad news or difficult news just a function of news? Is it just inevitable that it's going to always default to difficult stories?
This is a complex one. I think the best way I can answer it is by starting off with a case study. And, when we were sort of discussing this before we went live, I was reminded of a little-known newspaper from 2016 that was launched by the owners of the Mirror, and it was called The New Day, and you may remember it. But basically, this was a newspaper that was dedicated to good news, or to largely good news. But it was also intended to be a really quick read, and I think the editor at the time wanted to ensure that people could read the good news really quickly and digest it within like 20 minutes, basically. And it failed. After 3 months, the sales were just non-existent. People didn't want to buy it. So I think that's kind of instructive as point number one, which is that typically, good news hasn't really sold well, and I think we know that from history. I think one of the things that on the really dark and difficult days in journalism makes life worthwhile in the trade press is the ability to shout loud and proud about good things. And I've definitely had moments where I think, you know what, I'm really, really glad that I work in this space, rather than being told by some under pressure Daily Mail editor to go out there to Calais and get me a story that's going to outrage people. So I'm grateful to work in a press environment that is slightly more balanced, and there's definitely ways in which we've tried to foreground the good news and make more. We're by no means perfect, but our Great Advice, Great Profession initiatives are there for that. The team we work with on the audience development side at Citywire, they have a kind of multifaceted role in that they go out and talk to people and write, and they try and establish some consensus about sort of best practice and stuff. And that's a huge source of good news for us, and we want to be promoting that. So an example of that is the article I edited this morning from Chloe Moran at Boost Financial. Chloe is without doubt one of the biggest superstars in the profession. She's 29 years old. She's got every possible accolade that you would want, both professionally as a financial planner, but also as in the industry award sense. So celebrating people like her and actually editorially deciding deliberately to disproportionately oversell that is part of my process. She sent me a message saying I don't want it to come across as though I'm blowing my own trumpet. And I think for a woman in the profession, to succeed is still a big news story, unfortunately, and it's up to us as editors to highlight that and to foreground it and to celebrate that as much as we can. So I make no apologies for you could call that a positive discrimination of a kind, but I think editorially it's essential, particularly in our space.
So that leads me on to a question that I was almost, and we spoke about this briefly the other day. I almost wanted time to run out so that I didn't get the chance to ask it, because I've been going back and forward in my mind trying to think of what is the fairest, safest way to ask this without either saying something stupid or not so much offensive but unfair. And I'm going to ask it anyway, because I think it's incumbent on us to ask a difficult question and to have this discussion, especially with people live on the right-hand side. I look at some of the work that you in particular, but also, I mean, it doesn't happen without a supportive team around you in Citywire and a New Model Advisor. Some of the work that obviously we've done together on mental health and with other people as being a good news story within financial services and affecting change. But there's a dynamic that kind of plays out a little bit in my head that I wanted to ask you about, in that if I was to look at the trade journalism as a whole and create a persona based on the people who make up that profession, and that's with the caveat that it is always highly dangerous to talk about anything in stereotypes and generalizations. There's always going to be tons of people who don't conform to this. However, in kind of aggregate, the trade press and the people who make up it, I would characterize as being progressive, left-leaning, liberally minded individuals. The flip side of that is that there's a big segment of your audience that, and again, all the points notwithstanding about generalizations and everything like that, but in terms of the demographics, are likelier to be centre-right on average. And particularly around the stuff that we did in mental health and some of the stuff that I see you do at Citywire for diversity, how is that a consideration at all? Am I trying to look? Am I looking for an intellectual point to make myself look clever? Is it a consideration? Is it something that's on your mind when you were putting the retreats together, for example, where we're talking about mental health and diversity? I mean, it's a difficult question to put you on the spot with, but how much of that's on your mind?
Very happy to talk about that. I the first thing I'd say is it's not a straw man. It is an issue, and it's hard because as journalists, particularly in the trade press, where you're representing the thoughts, views, and opinions of a profession with more expertise in a specific topic than you, it's hard to, it's a hard path to tread. To answer your question about specifically about the retreats and the events on mental health, yes, we made very specific decisions there. Normally at Citywire events, there's the opportunity to stick your hand in the air and ask a question. And, for good or for ill, we decided not to do that for very good reasons. And, which was to ensure, first of all, that everyone was on the same playing field and that nobody got the opportunity to put anyone else down. Second of all, so that everyone had to listen. I don't regret that decision. I mean, I think it was arguably, in hindsight, it was arguably quite risk averse. But there have been plenty of other examples at our events where people have stuck their hands up and said something sort of controversial and off topic that we wanted to avoid. We wanted to avoid that. And as a starting point, I think we were trying to build some consensus. And when we were doing that, we wanted the control. So, happy to be criticised for that. But that was definitely an explicit decision we made. In terms of the people that we talk about and represent, and the discourse, it's absolutely a consideration as a big part of my life is thinking about that and the difference between difference between me as a person, who I am, my identity socioeconomically, and the people that I write about. And there's a generational thing there, obviously. I think I without being too pessimistic, I do see it as part of a broader problem, which is that the UK is in the middle of a culture war. I think progressive political failure in dealing with socioeconomic tensions has produced, in part, a culture war. And unfortunately, journalists are on the front line there. And for all their faults, unfortunately, I do think journalists are essential. They're an essential service. And it's hard to be a journalist sometimes and to be in the firing line. But, I know some absolutely fantastic journalists and who prove the necessity and the utility of journalism as not just as a moral, force for good, but as a practical thing in society. So, it's hard. It's hard being criticised. And I think part of the free speech element is always being open to people saying to you what they think of you, as long as it's not in a harassing way. We have to be open to that and listen to our readers. equally, we have our own, editorial ideas. Personally, I think there's a kind of pragmatic consideration here for people in the profession who perhaps aren't as a fan of the progressive side, which is that it's going that way anyway. And I think there's a sort of put up or shut up element to this, which is that we can spend all the time we want on the NMA comment boards talking about how crap the regulator is at finding dealing with whistleblowers or shutting down the bad firms. But the trajectory remains the same, is that it is no longer acceptable to behave like a shyster and to rob people of their money in a way that perhaps it was 20, 30 years ago. Obviously, there's still stuff like that going on, regrettably, but I think there is a narrative here that the portcullis is coming down and the drawbridge is coming up, and the FCA doesn't ultimately want to let people into financial services that have those bad intentions. And one of the battle lines there has been DB transfers, because what the FCA has essentially said is, okay, well, there's a lot of very well-meaning advisors out there who are doing the wrong thing, and they think it's a case of scammers, and actually it's on their doorstep. They think they're doing the right thing, and they're not. And that's a very difficult conversation to have about the profession and with the profession. But journalism is an essential part of that. And I think it takes the kind of self-awareness and the kind of humility for people in a professional space to talk about, that as a failing or that as a problem, as it does any other issue like diversity or inclusion or mental health. So, I would always encourage our readers to do that, to try and, even perhaps sort of, I suppose, behaviourally they're being tugged in another direction by their conscience or their political opinions, to try and be open about it. I think one of the things we've discussed and proven and learned about from wellbeing is that, it's really important to open up to failure and the concept of failure and where things go wrong and where things go right. And the profession can do that and talk openly about its own failures and strengths, then I think that will be better for the consumer, to be honest, and it will push the profession in the direction of being in a much better place with the regulator too. And for its part, yeah, the regulator can do better itself, but that's out of advisors' hands, unfortunately.
Listen, that's a great note to end on. Like, unbelievably, that's us gone over our 3/4 of an hour. Incredibly, I'm just looking at the numbers. Almost everybody, like 90% of you, have hung on till the end. I just have one final question to ask you, Ollie, because I promised that I would ask it, and it comes from a great financial planner, Mr. Darren Cook. Darren, why is your music taste so bad?
Why does my music taste so bad?
Yeah.
My music taste is so bad because of conflicting messages that I got as a 15-year-old about whether I should be into the Beatles or whether it was actually Green Day that were better. And naively, as a sort of childish schoolboy, I was not able to navigate those push and pull factors emotionally. On a serious note, why is my music taste so bad? I think there's a feedback loop between the music that I play and write in my spare time, which is objectively dreadful, and what I like to listen to. And that's a self-fueling fire that I'm sorry to say I've inflicted upon Twitter today. But as the old hashtag goes, sorry, not sorry.
Well, that's a great answer. Tom McPhail saying Green Day every time is a ludicrous thing to say in the context of the Beatles, but there we go. Listen, we're well over our time. The last thing to say is thank you very, very much, Mr. Smith, for joining us today. It was a great session. I hope people on the live chat, or if you're joining us from the future, it could be any number of years in the future on YouTube. Don't access the live chat on YouTube. There's 20 or so home games, and it places an incredible strain on the Landcat for us to try and do live chat on all of those videos 24/7. So unfortunately, you've missed out. Thank you very much for everyone for attending. We will be back in the future with 100% fewer moustaches, no doubt, as Mr. Poulsen re-enters the fray of hosting. So thanks very much. Over and out. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Steve. Thanks, everyone.